I saw wasn't human.
Oh, my God.
It was very tall. And what's more, it saw me. This thing.
Rawhead Rex.
Hi, and welcome again to the Clive Barker podcast. This is episode 4. We'll be talking about Books of Blood, Volume 3. And with me is Jose Leitao.
Hi, guys.
And I'm your host, Ryan Danhauser. So, Jose, what have you been up to lately?
Well, I've seen the Rawhead Rex movie again.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's as fun as I remembered it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's the movie directed by George Pavlou, and we'll be talking about that today. And I've been looking at the Books of Blood Volume 3. It's a pretty nice set of stories. It's got some of my personal favorites here. I've also been looking into the Clive Barker's short stories analysis book by Gary Hoppenstand, which is called Imagination as Metaphor in the Books of Blood and Other Works. Also provides a lot of good insight on the Books of Blood stories.
Yeah.
Apart from that, nothing much Clive Barker related, except, you know.
Did you finish Abarat 3?
Oh, yeah. No, well, not yet. I had to actually put that a little bit on hiatus because I was doing other stuff when I was working on, you know, my research, my scientific research. But I'm almost halfway. So it's been a fun ride so far.
My wife is reading it right now.
Oh yeah.
So I'm looking forward to talking to her about it. I think the problem is that it's been 7 years since number 2, and so. You know, for fanatics like us, we go. You know, we may go. I mean, you probably remember all of 1 and 2. I had to go back and reread them, but she's not going to go back and reread 1 and 2, so she's having a hard time remembering what was going on in the first 2.
Right. Pretty much the whole. What I really carried from book 1 and 2 is that Candy is our hero. There's like the princess inside her soul, and Midnight's bad. So Midnight wants to rule the rest of the Abarat. And from then on, it's pretty much, all you need to know.
Well, and I had thought that Carrion was dead. And from what I've been hearing, that wasn't really some kind of a cliffhanger. I think we were supposed to assume that he wasn't really dead, but I thought he was dead.
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because I always thought that his death was not going to be definitive. Yeah. I always imagined that he was too big of a villain and he had too much of a role with the whole princess thing and how, Carrion wanted to marry the princess and there's this triangle with the prince and everything. Yeah. So I always wondered, well, they killed him, but he's coming back.
Well, and you think it's just because Carrion is kind of a bastard, but then reading book 3, you kind of start to learn what Princess Boa was like. And up until then, we thought that Princess Boa was like this perfect creature, from the daytime side of the Abarat.
Yeah.
And it's really more complicated than that. She's really not as nice as everybody thinks she is.
Yeah, that's what Clive does. He kind of like, he goes on and just when you think you're getting the whole picture, he introduces a few more elements into the mix and pulls the carpet under you, and you go, oh, okay. The villains are not always completely evil, while the good characters are always not completely good.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting.
Exactly.
So what I've been doing, let's see, I've finished reading the Nightbreed comics, which were, they started out kind of aimless, a little bit, like that The first few episodes were just about that rogue group of Nightbreed that just wanted to eat meat. And I thought, this isn't taking the story anywhere. But then as you go along, it gets better and better. And I think from, just reading all of the reader comments and stuff at the end of each issue, they came out twice or every 2 months at first, and I thought that they could afford to keep running the comic at that rate, but then it got popular enough and there was enough demand that they tried to make it monthly, and it seems to me that might be what killed it.
It could be. It could be. Yeah, go ahead.
That just cost too much for the amount of people that were reading it.
And then it was also a time where Marvel was trying to cut down the number of comics they were putting out. Yeah. And I guess that was one that didn't make the cut, so they just,
They were on the road to being bought out by Disney like 10 years later.
Because the whole thing about the final chapters of the Nightbreed comics, it's been a while since I've read them, so I'm going to be a little vague here because this is not an episode about the Nightbreed comics, but when it is, I'll definitely be ready. But the whole thing about this is I thought they were trying to go for a much more broad universe incorporation of other elements of Clive Barker stories, like Rawhead Rex. So Rawhead Rex was also a big player into the Nightbreed thing, and I thought that was really cool. They were trying to incorporate other characters from other stories into the mix.
And some of the best comics that I ever read were the Nightbreed and Hellraiser crossover. And
Jihad.
And you would think that would be terrible, just the idea of it. But when you read it, they're just excellent. They're really good.
Oh yeah. They're pretty good. I mean, at the end with the whole Cabal, and the Nightbreed god,
Baphomet.
Baphomet,
merging together.
And Leviathan. It just turns into a real. It's one of those things that makes the stories a little bigger because it mixes things together and it makes you feel like, oh, so this can intermingle with that and create something completely different, and then you get a completely, makes complete sense that you interpret it that way and that things can actually intermingle.
And it was really a Nightbreed comic more than a Hellraiser comic, because the Hellraiser comic at the time didn't have a continuous story. So, but what happened in this Hellraiser comic carried over into the Nightbreed comic after that. So, I kind of when I organize them on the shelf, that's how I'm putting them now. Knowing that the Hellraiser comics are just little one-offs.
Yeah, the Hellraiser comics were more like little stories, little personal stories of episodes that would happen within the Hellraiser universe. Yeah,
there were some recurring Cenobite characters, but not like an overarching story.
Yeah, there were. Yeah. The whole thing that became a lot more of a continuous story was the Harrowers miniseries.
Yeah.
If you read it, any of it?
Yes.
The Harrowers?
Yeah, I read them. I read them. I think there might be one issue at the end that I'm missing, but they just kind of stopped.
The Harrowers with art by Gene Colan. That was a really nice comic run. And that made you realize that if these things had proper time to develop and, proper time to develop, in a continuous way, and if the comics had been able to progress, I think we would have gotten a really cool, mythology and a really cool set of storylines within that universe. And then there was also the Pinhead comics, which was a miniseries of, I think, six books.
Yeah.
Did you ever read that one?
No, I never did. I've seen them, but I've never read them.
Yeah, I have those. They're pretty fun. They describe how the whole. I think, again, it's been a while since I've read this. I need to check up on this, but I think that they had this whole thing where there were archetypes of Cenobites that would range over the ages, and the Vasa Iniquitatis or something. Mm-hmm. And Pinhead had different incarnations along the ages of time. And you start off from something in the time of, the Neanderthal man or something.
So this is kind of how to explain how Pinhead, the character, is timeless, even though Captain Spencer was like a World War I guy.
Just another incarnation of Pinhead. It's like the entity of Zype Totek, which is his name, would intermingle with a mortal body, and then they would become something different, but still the same. It would be a different incarnation of Pinhead, but still the same entity across time. It's a really interesting comic book. It's a really cool one. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, the comic universe really expanded on this whole thing.
So in Clive Barker news, I guess the first thing we've got the Abarat 3 paperback is scheduled to come out on October 11th, 2012. So I think the good thing that we can take out of this is you out there that are listening, buy Abarat 3 on hardcover, and you have all the way until October to buy that before it goes out of print. The hardcover is way, way better than the paperbacks. They don't even put the paintings in those.
Oh, yeah, right. I've seen some hardcover editions, some paperback editions, sorry. Yeah, even though they're nice, they're more portable. You don't have to carry around a big, chunky hardcover volume. I mean, there's the fact that you have to sacrifice the artwork, which I think is such an integral part of the book, you know?
It's half. Hey. I mean, really, I think it's half of what those books are, is the painting.
It is. Yeah. It is, yeah. But, you know, anyway, if you can't afford it, or if you want something more portable, then the paperback is the way to go.
Yeah, or you could just check out the hardcover from the library.
Or that, I mean.
Yeah. Okay, so, and they, if you go to Revelation's website, they had a little blurb about it, but the image is broken, so we don't get to see what they put on the cover. I'm kind of guessing that it's probably the same as the cover for the hardcover, just smaller, but who knows?
Oh, really? I'm checking it out right now. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Abarat 3 UK paperback release. Yeah, it's broken for me, too. Yeah. You know, I'm sure they'll fix it.
Okay. So the next thing is in Twitter, Clive Barker's been dropping some hints about Abarat 4 and 5. So up until now, he's had the books all kind of mapped out with paintings, and he's had kind of a clear idea of where the story was going from the paintings that he's already made. But he's starting to realize now that the story is turning in a direction that he hadn't anticipated, and he's going to have to paint like 100 more or so paintings, he said.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I thought he was done.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I've seen all the paintings, and it's just, I mean, at least all the ones that are stored, and it's unbelievable.
Okay.
I mean, I saw them all stacked together. I didn't open up, I didn't pull out each one and look at them. I wish I'd had time to do that, but...
Well, I'm happy. I'm happy that he's going to do more paintings. I mean, I was laughing, but I'm really happy that he needs to, go on and do some more stuff, because you can't get too much of Clive Barker's artwork.
Yeah, well, and you don't like. I didn't like the idea that he was penned in by what he had planned back in 2002. So
yeah.
So this is good. Next thing, really quick, issue 10 of the Hellraiser comic is out, and it's written by Rob Humphrey and Mark Miller. So that's kind of interesting now that it's been taken over by them. And I read it; it's really good. Should go out and buy it. It's got an interesting take on the Hellraiser Hell, and kind of expands on the new Kirsty Cenobite character, the Kirsty and Pinhead character.
Well, I hope that I don't know, but could this be tied in with the whole concept of hell that we will see in the Scarlet Gospels? That's, a question that I would like to know.
Yes, because there are hints. Actually, it looks like it's taking place after, because a person that's like an assistant or a friend of Harry D'Amour is a character in this, and they're saying like Harry doesn't want to see you. Because Captain Spencer is out in the real world, right, as a regular human being again, and what they're saying is Captain Spencer doesn't want to see you because, well, And Captain Spencer's like, yeah, I understand.
Yeah, so it's they're referencing the unreleased Scarlet Gospels already.
Exactly, and
cool.
Yeah, and Mark Millar can do that because he's been editing Scarlet Gospels all this time.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Totally.
So the health update. So in the last episode, I had thought, from what I'd been told that Clive was doing really well, and that it sort of implied that this thing in the hospital wasn't that serious. And I'm sorry about that, because I only knew what I'd been told, and probably from their end, they could only tell as much as they felt comfortable telling too. But it turns out, now Clive has revealed in Twitter that it was quite a bit more serious than we thought.
Good God, yes.
Yeah,
he suffered from toxic shock.
Yeah, just a trip to the dentist, and all of this, some toxins from a bad tooth got into his bloodstream and infected his body, and he got toxic shock and went into a coma. And he sort of even hinted that the doctors thought he was going to die until they found him trying to pull his breathing tube out. That
scared the heck out of me. I'll be honest. When I read that on Twitter, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that, this had happened. And I was like, how could this have happened? I mean, I was angry and sad at the same time.
Yeah.
Because, let's face it, if this had gone any other way, it would have been like a terrible, horrible loss.
Yeah.
For all of us as Clive Barker fans, and the artwork, the literature, the literary world in general, and the art world, in general too.
Well, and it's awful, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad that I didn't know what was happening at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm much happier hearing about it now that everything's okay. Then if I'd heard at the time, he's in a coma and they don't know if he's going to make it, that would have been awful. I mean, I see Clive Barker more than I see a lot of my friends that I grew up with now, because I fly to his signings all the time, and when I see him, we sort of joke around and stuff, and I think, I don't know, that would have been awful. It would just been too much.
Yeah. But he's doing fine. He's getting stronger by the day. He's been doing actually a lot of Twitter updates because he's been spending a lot of time resting, and I'm guessing that he keeps a computer nearby. So he's been talking about dreams that he had when he was in a coma. He's been talking about things that he's been doing, like the gaining strength. Like now he can walk into the shower or walk to the kitchen without help or without holding on to things. And he's really thanking all the support that everybody has been sending him on Twitter.
Yeah, which is great. And another thing that he revealed that I thought was really cool that I never would have imagined is that while he's working on the Abarat, he watches nature documentaries with the sound turned off to see all the little animals and all the different weird kind of animals popping up on the screen and stuff. Inspires him to have all these crazy kind of things in the Abarat.
Oh, okay. So he kind of like mixes and matches little animals and releases them into the Abarat as fantastic creatures.
Yeah, and it's like I took a lot of creative writing in college and stuff, and it was always like, oh, you should try to keep yourself totally clear of distractions and. And some of the people will be like, oh, I have a candle that I burn next to me while I'm writing. And, you just think of such a sparse kind of like a jail that you just sit down and you get to work. And I thought that was really cool that, there are other ways to do things besides just, boxing yourself into this sort of stark place and writing.
Yeah, I guess. Actually, it's funny. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday while I was getting ready for this. And it was a podcast. It was Artists on Tour. It was Clive Barker. I'll need to check the exact place and date of this. But this was a few years ago when Clive Barker was, he was talking about releasing the Scarlet Gospels, and he was talking about writing Abarat.
Oh, and, yeah, it was, that was like in L.A., maybe? Is it the one that you had to pay for on iTunes, right? It was like
probably
$2 or something like that.
Probably. It was called Artists on Tour.
Yeah.
And it was Clive Barker. And someone asked him if the way he wrote was like he planned things ahead or he let things flow organically.
Yeah.
And he was telling that it was a mix of both. So that was, his way of writing things like that.
Yeah.
Which, if you're a Clive Barker fan, you know that at least for the theater, it was a very collaborative kind of writing, a very organic flow. For the novels, he kind of mixes the two processes a little bit. So
and you can tell. You can tell that he has an idea of where he wants things to go, but maybe things change a little bit as he goes along.
Yep.
So the next thing, the Mad Monster Party. So this is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's March 23rd. They're going to be showing a 3-hour version of Nightbreed.
I am so jealous that you guys are going to be able to go.
Yeah, oh man. So Craig Sheffer and Ann Bobby are going to be there. And then there's a lot of cool stuff, going on there that's, some like Tony Todd will be there. That's kind of Clive Barker related. But there's a lot of other cool people that are I'm putting together all what DVDs and Blu-rays that I need to bring to get signed and stuff. I'm really excited about this. So at first, I'm in Fairbanks, Alaska, so plane tickets from here are just god-awful expensive. I mean, probably. I'm sure it's probably the same for you if you were going to fly to the U.S., but I at first bought a ticket for $1,700 to fly down there because they said that, I have a lot of built-up airline miles, and they said that won't work. But then my stepsister, Becky, works for Alaska Airlines, and she told me if I just stay one more day, then I can use my airline miles. So my $1,700 ticket became a $100 ticket.
Oh, 100?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's an incredible saving.
So yeah, I'm really happy. I mean, I'm happy to spend another $99 for one more night there. I mean, it's time I have to take off of work, I guess, but geez.
Well, I guess the money you're saving is going to be spent on buying photos and signatures.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm prepared this time. Last time when I went to the Texas Frightmare weekend, I didn't really realize that people were going to be charging $25 per signature. So I'm looking at all of this, and like David Prowse, who played Darth Vader, is going to be there. Joe Turkel, who was in The Shining and Blade Runner, is going to be there.
Oh yeah, Tyrell, right?
Yeah, and he was the bartender on The Shining.
Yeah.
And Tony Todd, so I'll have the Candyman movies, and I'll have Night of the Living Dead 1990 remake, which I thought was really cool.
And also, Tony Todd, wasn't he the monster in Valerie and the Stairs?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I think you're right. I just have the iTunes version
not sure.
of that movie, but...
Yeah, I'm not sure. We got to check it.
I'll have to watch that again. I didn't like that movie, but...
I actually been rewatching, I forgot to say this, I actually been rewatching the Masters of Horror Clive Barker episodes. Yeah, yesterday I saw Heckle's Tale.
Yeah. Have you read the story?
No, actually, those unpublished stories or that have been published in rare places, I still haven't found all of them, so that's one of the stories I haven't read.
Well, it's a bookstore in that it's called Dark Delicacies. And they published a book called Dark Delicacies 1, and that's where that story is.
Okay. I'll look it up.
Yeah. So, and then John Russo and George Costanza from the original Night of the Living Dead. Linda Blair, who was the little girl in The Exorcist, will be there. Brad Dourif, who was in the two Lord of the Rings movie, he was Wormtongue, and he was in Dune. Dourif? Yeah.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
Dee Wallace, the lady from The Howling. James Wong, who was in Big Trouble from Little China. He was David Lopan. Is going to be there. And let's see. Oh, and he was also in Blade Runner.
And he was Chen, the guy. the guy who made the eyes.
Yes.
Chu? I think it was Chu or Chen, I don't know.
And Rutger Hauer will be there. And that reminded me that I've always meant to buy Blood of Heroes, because I love that movie, but I just have never owned it, because it's been so hard to find. But I went and found it on Amazon and bought a copy, so I'm waiting for that to come in the mail. And Chris Sarandon, who was in Princess Bride, and also the voice of Jack Skellington in Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a funny thing about Nightmare Before Christmas, so that guy was the voice of Jack Skellington, but who sang the songs was...
Danny Elfman.
Danny Elfman, right? Yeah. The composer. Yeah, okay.
Composer for Nightbreed, so see how we turned that all around and made it about Clive Barker again?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that I'm really excited for, and I guess I'd like to put this out there for all of our listeners, that if you have any... Because I'm not really a super spectacular interviewer. In fact, I get nervous and I choke and I ask stupid questions. So I want the viewer or our listeners out there to come up with questions for me to ask Craig Sheffer and Ann Bobby, and maybe Tony Todd also. And I'm gonna bring a microphone with me, and I'm gonna record this, and that'll be one of our episodes.
Sweet, great idea.
So don't make me embarrass myself and ask stupid questions. Actually, I remember one in 2008 when I went for I went to Dark Delicacies for the Midnight Meat Train book signing, and I said, hey, to Clive, I said, hey, I was pretty mad about this Midnight Meat Train not getting into theaters, and he's like, you were mad? And then I think, oh God, what have I done? I'm just trying to... I was just trying to be supportive, and I screwed it up. Okay, yeah. So anyway, we need your questions for Craig Sheffer and Ann Bobby, and if you want me to, I can even say your name to them, at the time. Just submit those. You can put them on our website, send them to me on Twitter, put them on Facebook, on any of the Clive Barker groups.
Forums.
Yeah, or on the forum at timewins.com/Clive. And I'll be happy to forward those along, and that'll make me look smart instead of looking dumb when I'm asking questions.
Well, I might send you a couple of questions.
That would be awesome. So our next news is really, really sad. Daniel von Bargen, who played Nyx in Lord of Illusions, is in the hospital right now in critical condition from a suicide attempt. He had shot himself in the head.
Yes, he apparently he had been suffering from diabetes for quite some time now, and according to his own words, he was not a very good diabetic. So he had already lost one of his legs to the disease, and he was scheduled that morning to go check into the hospital to get some toes amputated, and he didn't want to do it. So he was really depressed, and he shot himself in the temple, but he was still conscious enough to call 911.
Oh, jeez.
So they went in, and they took him to the hospital, and he's in critical condition. I don't know any more news. It was on a few websites.
That's terrible.
It's a horrible thing. He's like 61 or something, and he's way too much of a good actor to end his career like this.
He's an incredible actor. I mean, him and Scott Bakula made Lord of Illusions what it is. I mean, that and Clive Barker's directing.
Yeah, and then Daniel von Bargen has been in movies like Philadelphia, Broken Arrow, several amazing movies, Amistad, and he's an excellent actor. And I hope that even though he's going through a really bad time right now, I really hope that he finds the strength to go on.
Yeah, I hope he pulls through and is okay after this. But, jeez.
Yeah, it's a really bit of sad news there.
Yeah. Okay, well, on our main topic, we're going on to the Books of Blood, Volume 3. So in the United States, this was the last one that was officially titled The Books of Blood, but for you fans out there, you all know that there are 6 volumes of the Books of Blood, so we're really only halfway through. And our first story here is Son of Celluloid.
Mm-hmm. Or, like I like to call it, the little tumor that could.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a guy escaped from prison, and he's being chased down by the police. He shot a policeman in the face when a young guy, and he got shot himself in the leg. And he's trying to escape, and he finds a little hole he finds a little grate in a wall behind this movie theater, and he goes in there to hide.
It's Barbario. The title of the character that opens the story is Barbario, and he, like you said, is escaping from the cops, and he got shot in the leg, and he crawls into the Movie Palace Cinema.
Yeah,
which to try to escape. And
it turns out that there was an angel painting on the wall in the back of the theater that one of the more recent owners, or one of the owners in the past, didn't like it, and instead of painting over it, he built a false wall. So there's a little room in the back of the theater that nobody knows about or remembers anymore.
Yeah, a little crawl space in the Movie Palace Cinema, which used to be a mission hall. So they had a little fresco with the angelic host behind the screen.
Yeah.
And as Barbario crawls in there, he's like bleeding to death, and he doesn't really know that he's bleeding to death, and he thinks that he's just gonna, lay low for a little bit, and he actually starts to imagine his little guardian angel god thing called Sing Sing.
Yeah.
Which is a fat guy with a grin and a
sort of
salami in one hand and a cup of coffee on the other.
Sort of a patron saint of criminals.
Yeah. So, and he basically dies behind that screen from blood loss while the movie Satyricon from Fellini is playing on the silver screen.
And he also doesn't know that the pain in his stomach is actually a tumor. But we learn that because the narrator is a third-person omniscient narrator, we learn that he really had stomach cancer. And he probably would have died fairly soon anyway. In fact, I'm not 100% sure that he died from blood loss or that he died from his stomach cancer.
Well, I guess, the immediate thing was the blood loss. And then they actually say that, crawling through the crawl space, he actually tore open his...
Oh, that's true.
Wound again, and he started bleeding too much. So, like you said, even in prison, he had recurring stomach aches.
Yeah.
And he didn't know that he had cancer, because violent criminals don't really think about dying from cancer. They think about dying from a stab wound or a shot.
Yeah.
So he didn't really care too much about that. But the fact is that he dies in the back of the theater.
Yeah. So it sort of flashes forward to the people who work in the theater. We've got Birdie is our main character. She's sort of an overweight theater. She's not a manager, but she works there.
Yeah, Birdie.
Birdie, and then Ricky is the other guy.
Yeah.
And
the theoretical bisexual, as he is described. Yeah.
Right. He's sort of a pretentious film buff type of a drug addict person.
Right.
And so there's a girl, Lindy Lee, who was there at the theater with a date, and her date disappeared, and she's kind of all blubbery, and Birdie's like, oh, great, rolling her eyes, and she's like, I can't find him anywhere, and so Birdie sends Ricky into the bathroom to see if this Lindy Lee's boyfriend is in there.
Yeah, he's called Dean.
Dean, that's right. Yeah, and so we find out that movie characters are coming to life in this story. Yeah,
and when Ricky, I'm going to talk about the scene where Ricky walks into the bathroom, and again, we didn't say it in the beginning, but we're going to spoil these stories for you because we're going to discuss everything that happens. But Ricky,
prepare to get spoiled.
Yeah, Ricky walks into the bathroom, and as soon as he closes the door, the bathroom kind of disappears, and when he turns around, he's in the middle of a far west city, like with a saloon and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he starts to hear he starts to hear the voice of John Wayne, talking to him, and it turns out that the other kid had done the same thing. He had walked into the bathroom, and he was doing his business, and all of a sudden he heard like the voice of John Wayne saying, "What are you doing in the middle of my town, boy?"
Yeah.
And, you know.
So in this movie world, this guy had come to take a crap, and he's like in the, you know, now instead of being on the toilet, he's like in the middle of a saloon, I think, sitting, squatting and so, you know, the John Wayne sheriff doesn't like that, and he's actually probably a lot more of a jerk than his characters are. Yeah,
and he's trying to shoot him or do something to him. And when Ricky walks in, he finds the kid, like, trying to escape, and he gets shot in the back, and he dies. Like, what the hell is going on? And he just dies from the shot.
Yeah.
And Ricky hears John Wayne, you know, saying, "And what are you doing here?"
Yeah. And Ricky, I think Ricky believes that this is some kind of a hallucination, and he thinks if he just turns around and just goes to the bathroom in the urinal, that everything's going to go away, and he ends up getting shot in the ear.
Yeah, this bullet comes out of nowhere and just nicks his ear, and he's like, "Okay, this is not a dream. This really hurts."
Yeah.
And then John Wayne is like standing behind him and saying, you know, "Turn around, boy." And then he turns around and he gets so mad at what's going on that he kind of decks John Wayne to the floor. Which
is really cool because you're expecting that John Wayne is just going to shoot him. And I hadn't read this book in probably 10 years or so, so I forgot these little details. So that was kind of cool. It's like, oh yeah, he punched him right in the face, and he escaped. He got out of the bathroom.
Yeah, it's written to be a much more tense scene than we're actually saying. But he when he walks out of the bathroom, he's like bleeding from his ear, and he's really like nervous from what happened. And he just collapses on the floor of the cinema, and then we move on to Birdie and Lindy Lee again.
Yeah. So Birdie says, "All right, well, I'm just going to get you out of here. I don't know what's going on." Or she went in the bathroom, didn't she?
Yeah, she goes on to find Ricky after he had his confrontation, and she finds Ricky on the floor, passed out, and she wakes him up. She asks him for the keys, and he says that, "I think I dropped the keys in the bathroom." And she walks in there, and she gets the keys, and she says, "Okay, I'm going to try to open the door, and I'm going to try to get some cops to come here," and because he told her that the kid was dead in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And so she goes to the foyer, and I think meanwhile, Lindy Lee sees a little rabbit jump around, and she kind of like walks out of the foyer because she likes bunnies, and she goes up the stairs following that bunny, which is not a bunny at all.
Yeah.
And she's engulfed by the darkness, and we don't see her again until later in the story.
And meanwhile, and what we're learning is that this tumor has taken all of the power from the attention and the focus of all these people watching movies over the years, and is feeding on that and becoming something different, something sort of more supernatural.
Yeah, we don't really get that information until later in the story. But meanwhile, Birdie is trying to open up the locks of the cinema because they had closed for the night, and they were just waiting for Lindy Lee and a boyfriend to go out. But Ricky had bolted the door, and Birdie can't open it with any of the keys. And so, meanwhile, she tries calling the police, and who comes on the phone is the voice of Peter Lorre.
Yeah.
It actually is. It's not the police. It's something else.
And she's trying to fight being sort of hypnotized and taken in by this, what she thinks is a really, really good imitation of Peter Lorre. And and it turns out, and she fights that off, and she's like, no, what's going on here? People are dying, and this voice is kind of teasing and threatening her.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Ricky has, he went back into the bathroom because when Birdie went there to pick up the keys, she said, "I don't see any dead kid in the bathroom. I'm going to see if I can call the cops to see what's going on." And Ricky goes back into the bathroom, and he does find the kid
in the stall,
dead in the bathroom, in the stall with his eyes gouged out.
Yeah.
And that's when he comes out of there like panicking, and he sees an entity materialize inside the theater, the main hall of the theater, and it's Marilyn Monroe.
Yep.
Yeah, it's Marilyn Monroe, beautiful like she was in the movies, and
if we were in a horror movie watching this as a horror movie, we would hate him right now.
Yeah,
because he becomes a total idiot, and he's like taken in by Marilyn Monroe, and he's like, I don't care what happens to me anymore. I always loved Marilyn Monroe, so I'm just going to go up to her.
Yeah, he starts to get really mesmerized by this apparition of Marilyn Monroe, and he moves up closer to her, and Marilyn Monroe is doing that cliche thing where her skirt starts flying up with wind out of nowhere, and then he sees that she's not wearing any panties.
Yeah.
And then he finds that the gouged eyes from the kid in the bathroom are actually,
They drop out of her.
Yeah, they drop out of, Marilyn Monroe's, snatch. And she's like, oops. And even then, he doesn't care. He's not thinking rationally anymore.
At that point, he probably should have turned and run away, but...
Yeah, but then he gets too close to her, and then she turns into something else. She starts developing these kind of like tentacles and tendrils.
Yeah.
And she starts enveloping him in her embrace, or its embrace.
And she puts them in his ears, right? And they go through his ears, and around through his head, and push his eyes out the front.
Oh yeah, that's got a great line there when it describes how he starts looking at the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible. It's a horrible scene. But the thing that's more important about this scene is that we get a glimpse of what gives power to this entity, which is it needs people to look at her or it and desire it and, give it, reality and substance.
Because it's kind of merged with the theater in a way.
Yeah.
The power of movies.
From all the years that Barbario's corpse laid behind the silver screen, with the whole amount of movies that were projected there and all the, audiences that were sitting watching the silver screen, all those stares and glimpses and, fantasies, they kind of gave substance to the cancer, the tumor that was in Barbario's corpse.
Yeah.
And it became something supernatural. It became overcharged with, a desire to be seen and, it feeds on people's attention.
Yeah. Yeah, so Birdie is still trapped in here. We don't know what happened to Lindy Lee, but for all intents and purposes, Birdie is really the only person left alive here. As far as we know. And
Birdie. After all this thing where Rick gets killed by the ghost of Marilyn Monroe, Birdie is trying to get out of the theater, and she turns off the phone to the Peter Lorre impersonator. And she, all of a sudden, she goes into the main hall of the theater, opens the door, and there's, this huge bright light and this huge eye that looks out from the door and says, here's looking at you, kid. Imitating Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, I think. And then everything goes dark, and she listens, Ricky's dead.
So, and I think an important thing here is that this tumor creature knows that Birdie can't be hypnotized like everybody else. It just kind of shows itself as this horrific thing, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna scare you then.
It does try to mesmerize her, because as soon as she starts escaping that huge eye thing and the light, she starts going up the stairs, and she feels that something is pursuing her. And then all of a sudden she goes up the stairs into the hallway, and she sees this creature, sliding up to her. And this creature starts saying, look at me, pay attention to me, I want to be desired. And he starts feeding to her these visions like Bogart and
all of her favorite all of her favorite scenes from every movie that it can feed her.
It starts telling her, give your soul to me, give me some love. And it actually
Dumbo.
It says that teasing, it shows her glimpses of lives she'd lived, faces she'd loved. Mickey Mouse dancing with a broom from Fantasia, Broken Blossoms, Judy Garland, and, Fred Astaire, Orson Welles as Kane, Brando Crawford. And then it shows her an image that breaks the spell because she was getting mesmerized and the creature was getting closer to her. But then he shows Dumbo from Disney, and that breaks the spell because being overweight, she was very sensitive about growing up, people calling her, Dumbo, elephant. Yeah. And it gives her that little spark of anger, and she breaks the spell.
She hated Dumbo.
Yeah, she hated Dumbo.
And she realizes that, it's really just this little tumor. I mean, not little, it's big now. I mean, it's like maybe the size of a football.
Yeah.
So she grabs it and falls down on it.
She starts to approach it, confrontational, and she starts saying, "What are you under there?" And the tumor starts recoiling, saying, "Oh, you got no business with me." And she's like, "Oh, well, you try to kill me." And it says, "I want to live." And she says, "So do I." And then they actually tussle together a little bit, and it's like rolling itself around her.
Yeah.
And it was an old theater, and she falls through the floorboards at the end of the hallway, and she lands right on top of the crawl space where Barbario's body was there. And she actually falls on top of it, and that's when she sees where the cancer comes from. Yeah. And the cancer actually says, "This is the body I once occupied. Yes, his name was Barbario, a criminal, nothing spectacular. He never aspired to greatness." And she says, "And you?" And he says, "I was his cancer. I'm the piece of him which did aspire, that did long to be more than a humble cell." So that's why getting attention actually made it stronger. Yeah. And, of course, a tumor is just a piece of meat. But in this story, it's like it grew to be something else.
Yeah.
And it tries to possess her body, but what she does is, because she was really obese, she rolls over it and kills it.
And she's using her hands and ripping chunks out of it, and it eventually dies.
Yeah, and it's a really kind of an anticlimactic scene for me while I was reading this, and I'm like, okay, well, this is getting, this is really interesting, and all of a sudden, she rolls over it and squishes it, and I'm like, okay.
But it's not the end.
It's not the end.
Yeah.
And this story is divided into 3 parts, much like a movie, and it's like, first part is trailer, second part is the main feature, and then third part is censored scenes.
The aftermath.
Yeah.
And so she was the police questioned her about what had happened there. She explained it as truthfully as she could, and she had been institutionalized for a time. Yeah,
she actually is acquitted from a double murder. Yeah. Lack of evidence. And Lindy Lee has gone missing. Nobody ever found Lindy Lee, but Birdie knows what happened to Lindy Lee, so...
She goes to Lindy Lee's house, and we've learned through the narration that even
her down.
Yeah, even Lindy Lee's family they can't stand her anymore and don't want anything to do with her.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a different person.
Yeah.
And so she tracks her down, and Birdie knows that this tumor had sort of reproduced inside of her. Right? Mm-hmm. It had created another version of itself inside of her, and there was really nothing left of Lindy Lee anymore.
Right. And then Lindy Lee actually surprises everyone, or Birdie, because the minute that Lindy Lee looks at Birdie's face, she recognizes it, and she kind of explodes because the tumor was hiding inside Lindy Lee.
Yeah.
And it had infiltrated itself when she was chasing the bunny, and it had consumed her and set her free.
Yeah.
And the tumor was still living there, so it manifests itself, and Birdie shoots it in the head several times and douses it with gasoline or something and sets it on fire.
Yeah, and then she leaves.
And that's pretty much how the story ends. She stepped out into the street, her duty done, and went her way, confidently planning to live long after the credits for this particular comedy had rolled.
Yeah.
So that's the first story. The second story,
What's that? Oh.
I'm sorry. You go on.
Were you going to go on to the next story?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I think it's kind of interesting. I think this would make a good movie, and I think also this was kind of metacognates in a way that movies like 10 years later would do, like Scream and stuff. Movies, like a movie that, or in this case a book, but a story, but analyzing the way movies are, within the story, and kind of mimicking that.
It definitely has. It goes on to delve a little bit into the nature of the fascination of the silver screen and the classic movies that everybody knows about and everybody's seen while they were growing up. Yeah. It has to do with that. Basically the magic of cinema. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and like you were saying, our next one is Scapegoats. Or actually, no, I'm sorry.
Really?
No, it's Rawhead Rex.
Okay.
Sorry. I was scrolled down too far on my notes. So, yes, Rawhead Rex.
Rawhead Rex.
So, this has got to be one of my favorite stories out of all of them. Really, really good.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I agree. It's a wonderful story.
One really interesting thing about this story, and Clive Barker never really sits with any one character too long in any of these stories, but you still kind of get a sense of who the main character is. So, like in Son of Celluloid, you could say that the main character is Birdie. But in Rawhead Rex, none of these human characters are really the main character. I think probably Rawhead is more of the main character than any of them.
Yeah, and Ron Milton, the guy who actually discovers the mystery and is responsible for defeating Rawhead at the end.
He kind of, he gets a little more time than but he's also kind of a jerk.
He's more like a dyspeptic design consultant.
Yeah. He's one of these people that, wants to move out. He's tired of London and he wants to move out into the country where they're 40 minutes away, and live this rustic life in a house that's made out of stone and
get his kids to experience the great outdoors and have fresh air.
Yes.
Because this takes place in a little town called Zeal, which is 40 miles southeast of London. Yeah. I haven't looked to see if there actually is a Zeal, but
that would be cool. And and the pub there that everyone goes to is called the Tall Man, which is sort of foreshadowing of what we're going to find out later. And it probably nobody remembers, but it probably was named for Rawhead Rex.
Right. This is a fun story because it's a monster story. Oh yeah. It's no surprise that this story in particular got turned into a monster movie.
Yeah.
No, it was just begging for it.
It's a monster on the loose movie, but more what we can take from it is sort of this idea that Clive Barker plays with a lot, and that the dichotomy in Jungian psychology between anima and animus. It's like there's a little bit of female in every male, and there's a little bit of male in every female, and we have to have a little bit of that balance. And
definitely.
And Rawhead Rex is what happens when you're all male. You're just all this testosterone male, misogynistic evil.
It's like Gary Hoppenstand in his analysis of this book mentions that there is a male-female dichotomy where the conflict between this is really fierce, and the author establishes connections via the male, which is the monstrous destructive force of nature, to an antediluvian age where the mother goddess held great sway in primitive society. Yeah. Which is true, because that's what we're going to see next. And one time, it's really funny, I have to mention this anecdote, that Clive Barker stated that Rawhead Rex is basically a story about a 7-foot penis that terrorizes a city and is destroyed by a vagina dentata. So that's a great description.
Yeah, and that probably was kind of his outline, and then he had fun filling in all of the details.
Yeah, even the name Rawhead Rex. I mean, Rawhead.
Yeah.
And Rex. It's like the king
Yeah.
Well, you can take your own conclusions out of that.
It's a 9-foot phallus.
Even the description of Rawhead, it's the head, bald head as a moon, and
And then like a mane of black hair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But other details of his mouth. It's just like he opens his mouth and his teeth unsheath like cat's claws, and there are two rows of teeth.
Yeah.
Like a shark. But they're
right.
long scythe-like kind of teeth.
Exactly.
So, yeah, go ahead.
There's been a couple of artists who have did their best to, put into paper and put into an actual image of what Rawhead Rex would look like. One of them made the Eclipse graphic novel, which is a wonderful adaptation. Les Edwards. And the other guy I think it was Stephen Bissett.
Is that who drew the Rawhead in the Nightbreed comics?
Oh, in the Nightbreed comics?
Yeah, that one was really good too.
Right, I actually have a cover that has Rawhead, so I should know that. I bought a comic book art. Let me see. For Nightbreed, actually... Well, you wouldn't happen to have the Nightbreed comics standing by you, would you? Yeah, you're better off looking at that.
Okay. See if I can... Oh, wait, there they are.
Ricardo Villagran? No.
Well, and actually, the thing is with the Nightbreed versus Rawhead story...
I think it might have been Ricardo Villagran. Just check it.
Let's see. Yes, we've got Dan Lawless and Ricardo Villagran.
Exactly, yeah.
So then the thing here, though, to remember is that this Rawhead story arc was... they changed artists right in the middle of it, so... But still, I mean, it's a cool design. Mm-hmm. Really nice. The only thing I don't like about it is that he doesn't have 2 rows of teeth. He just has 1 row of teeth. But it's still, they put so many little nods to the story in that small little arc of the Nightbreed comic that that any little mistake like that is totally, forgivable.
Well, it's their own version of it because, Les Edwards does a great job in the Eclipse graphic novel. I mean, it does an amazing job. It's just mind-blowing. And then Stephen Bissett was an author who worked in, Swamp Thing and all those comic books for DC. And he did some pretty amazing work for an adaptation which fell through. Mm-hmm. And he also has a lot of images about Rawhead Rex and how his mouth would be and how his head would be like. Yeah. And, it's online. You can find that stuff. And I'll probably send you some links so you can put up for the, extras.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've always... even when I was in high school, I used to trying to draw Rawhead Rex, and I did a terrible job, but,
Oh, yeah?
Just trying to, sort of imagine what he looked like.
Yeah. But anyway,
I kind of wish that Fallon, Fallon from the forum.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
I wish that we could have gotten him for this because he's and more than anyone, he's an expert on Rawhead Rex. He knows more than anyone should about this character.
Here's a shout out to our friend Fallon from timewins.com/Clive. He's a member of the forum.
Yep.
And he's a big Rawhead Rex collector.
Oh, man.
He has some, models and everything. And he gets them professionally painted, and they turn out wonderful.
And I actually saw him at the Texas Frightmare weekend in line to see Clive Barker. So I was pretty far ahead of him in line because he had come in later with his family. But he had a bust of Rawhead Rex that he was sort of carrying with him. But unfortunately, he had his wife standing in line for him, and they had put the bust down, and he ran over to get signatures from Doug Bradley and Ashley Lawrence, and I kind of lost him. By the time I came out and was walking past the line, I was, I knew he was in there, but I couldn't find him anywhere, because it was just his wife standing in for him. So I wanted to talk to him, but But yeah, I saw his pictures, and he of how he had gotten Clive to paint some tattoos on on the Rawhead bust for him there at the time, which was really awesome.
I think I remember him typing something as a comment on the forum. Yeah. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what Clive's reaction to seeing the bust of the George Pavlou movie
because
version.
He fought with them on the design of that, and he lost.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
So want to get into the Books of Blood story?
Yeah. So Rawhead was buried in a field generations ago, buried alive under this stone monolith.
Mm-hmm.
And Garrow is a guy that's he's like, I don't understand why my father never plowed this field, and times are tough. And we need to use this field for crops. So he'd been clearing out all the crap, and the last thing left was this stone that he was trying to get out.
Yes, which is kind of like one of those old, Neolithic markers or something.
Yeah. So he pushed and pulled, and he used like a spade as a lever, and dug out all around it, way down deep. And finally, man, I'm trying to remember this without the movie.
Yeah,
it's hard. It's these scenes are fairly similar, but not exactly the same.
You want me to pick up from that?
Yeah, if you could.
Well, yes, okay. Well, he's been working at it for a few hours, and he finally sees it. The rock is budging, and he starts to get really mesmerized by what he's doing. And he breaks it open. There's like a surge of gas or moldy air coming out.
Yellow gas.
And then something grabs his spade, and he starts feeling like his mind, he starts listening to some kind of voice saying, pull, pull. And he starts pulling it, and then, you see Rawhead emerge.
Yeah.
And immediately Thomas Garrow gets attacked.
Yeah.
And
he picks him up and sort of throttles him to death, and then he inverts the body, and
he
removes him into the ground.
He removes his scalp, and he inverts it and pushes it into the ground where he just came out of.
Yeah.
And he just goes out, and he goes the monster has been set free. So. Yeah. And he's, in the comic book, I like the way they designed him really, really skinny. Like he was really skinny from being under the ground so long, and then it kind of bulks up near the end.
Yeah.
But it's actually very well written in the book. And
we could probably go back and forth between this and the comic as we go along, and then we can maybe talk about the movie after.
Yeah.
Because the movie is different enough that we can just separate that. But so Rawhead is on the loose, and we've learned that he's kind of the last of a race of creatures that lived in the wildwood.
Yeah,
and they sort of ran rampant. In the Nightbreed comic, they hinted that people would pick out one woman from their village and sort of send them out and let Rawhead and his tribe hunt them for sport.
Yes, and they would also mate with these women and create offspring that would usually kill the wives while they were giving birth to them.
And then the humans would kill the offspring.
Yeah, so they were kind of like pagan gods in a way. I mean, dominating the land.
Yeah.
Until they came over with some new force that they were scared of, and that actually, made them weak enough to be buried and forgotten.
Yeah.
And we will find out what that thing was later in the story.
So then the story moves to Ron Milton, right? He's He's kind of a
Ron Milton.
Yeah, and we talked about him a little earlier. He's a family man. He wants to commute from this town of Zeal to his job in London. He doesn't want to live in London anymore, and he wants
he's an everyman. He's a design consultant, Ron Milton. His wife is Maggie, and he's got 2 kids, Debbie and Ian.
Yeah.
And he wants to move into the Zeal because it's 40 miles of London, so he thinks he can just commute every day and, have better quality of life. But his house is taking forever to get ready.
Yeah. And
his kids are getting restless, and his wife is getting impatient.
Yep. It's funny because my father just retired and moved to Panama, and he's having that same problem.
Okay.
His house was supposed to be finished in July, and they're still working on it right now.
Right. Yeah, things are never like people, plan it out to be.
Yeah. But so he's upset about that. The husband and wife do not get along at all. They're the wife is like, I want to stay here. I want to become a part of the community and go to their functions. And the husband's like, hey, the house isn't ready. Let's just go back. And she's like, you can go back and take the kids if you want, knowing that obviously he didn't want to do that and get stuck with the kids.
Exactly.
So he's like, fine, we're going to do that, I guess.
So he's just introducing these characters to show that this is a guy who's, he's a family guy, but he's not in a very happy place right now.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Rawhead has found his way into a barn.
Yes.
And we see this woman trying to push a pony into a barn, and the horse is freaking out over the barn. He doesn't want to go in, and she smacks him, and he gets into the barn.
And she thinks it's because it's raining, right? She just thinks it's because there's a thunderstorm and it's raining, and that he's scared.
Yeah. And actually, Rawhead Rex is inside the barn hiding. And he sees the horse, and he's like, lunchtime. We get a very graphic scene where it depicts Rawhead killing the horse, eating him, tasting the blood. The blood was making him wise again. He was like, yes, this is the stuff that I was missing.
Because so much of him is hunger. And the hunger just drives him crazy, and he can't think straight.
Exactly. He's basically... appetite marks the monster just as celibacy marks the nun. That's the expression that Clive Barker once said. And basically what defines a monster is appetite. So this is appetite embodied in Rawhead Rex.
Yeah.
And, he sits in front of the carcass of the horse, intestines looped around him, like a mantle or something. And he starts to think about, okay, what am I going to do next? Now my belly is full.
Yeah.
Now I feel strong again. And then they cut back to well, wait, this is actually when they cut to Ron Milton. And then they cut back to it, and Rawhead has smelled that there is a child inside the house near the barn.
And he's like, oh my God, child meat is the best.
Yeah.
I gotta get her. So
because he loved to eat babies popping babies like popcorn when he was, ruling the earth.
Yeah. So he goes into the house, and he's sort of put off by the mother who was on her period. Yeah,
Amelia was on her period, and he doesn't want to touch her because he's like, I'm feeling that menstrual blood. Oh no, women. Yeah. So, but the little girl, was pretty fine. So, he's trying to chase the little girl, and he's trying to break into the house, and he breaks into the house, and he eats the little girl while the mother trips and falls over the stairways and dies.
Yeah. Yeah, she probably, if she was in her right mind, she probably could have been able to get away, but...
Yeah, but it's just such a horrifying monster that, it's kind of a chaotic scene.
And the way that he kills is just so awful, and, we'll get to the movie because it's not, not the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then she dies. Then is the next thing is the police discovering the what happened there?
Yes. Next, police discovers the body of Thomas Garrow, and the crows have been already pecking at its feet.
Right. So his feet are all skeletal, sticking up out of the ground.
Yeah. And, okay, so there's been a murder. There's the inspector, trying to understand, God, who did this? I mean, the body has been mangled.
And they sent him down from London because they don't have anybody qualified enough in Zeal to deal with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah. In the meantime, so Milton is driving around with his family, and his daughter needs to go pee-pee.
Well, and actually before that he had an argument with his wife because she's like, okay, there's murders going on here in town. Let's just go. And he's like, no, you said we need to be with we need to take part in this community, and so we should stand by them when they're having these problems. Right. And he's like, let's all go out for a drive. Which is kind of like, this is when you hate Ron Milton.
Yeah. And then, of course, the kids are miserable, and the little girl needs to, take a whiz.
Yeah, and the boy is, like, reading comic books and rolling his eyes like, give me a break. She just wants attention. She can have it. I've got my comic books, I guess. That's all I need.
Exactly. And then the little girl goes out, and she goes, like, behind this wall, and she starts screaming, and the parents go to see what's going on, and it's a dead mole or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And meanwhile, while the parents were looking to see what she was screaming about, the little kid is left in the car, and he sees this shadow come over the car, and it's Rawhead Rex.
And this is another time when it's hard to separate the movie from the story, because in fairness to the movie, it's fairly accurate as far as what happens. I mean, Rawhead reaches through I don't know if he breaks out the window or tears the door off, but he reaches in and grabs Ian and is dragging him across the seat. And Ian wets himself, and he's like dragging Ian through the puddle on the seat and pulling him forward.
Yeah, and then he sees Rawhead Rex, picks him up, opens his mouth, and there's a line written here that says, "The smell from his mouth was like the dumpsters behind the cafeteria times a million."
Yeah, which is really cool. That's a really cool way to get kind of inside of the kid's mind.
Inside of the kid's mind, exactly. Yeah. And then, actually, it's kind of gross, but the kid actually starts to puke at the same time that Rawhead, like, bites his head off.
Yeah, so he pukes down Rawhead's throat, and then Rawhead bites the top of his head off.
Yeah, when you say it like this, it kind of sounds a little gross, but it's a very powerful scene, because the father is looking up from behind the wall where his daughter was, and he just sees the monster pulling his son out of the car and chopping his head off. Yeah. And he just gives the, blood-curdling scream, like, "Oh, no, my son." Yeah. And, And just as that happens.
And to be able to stand there and not do anything about it is just a nightmare. And then, so I think Rawhead, like, has the kid, like, in his mouth dangling there and sort of runs off with him.
I think so, yeah. Yeah. And he just grabs him and just escapes, and the parents are just completely shocked, and, So we forgot one kill, actually, which is Denny. I think it's Amelia's husband that gets killed when he goes to check on the pony.
Oh, yeah, right. He has a rifle, right?
Yeah, and he gets killed, and then the monster gets into the house, and that's when Amelia and the girl get killed too.
Yeah.
But Rawhead really likes to eat kids. Yeah. So there's a scene in the Eclipse graphic novel where you see Rawhead Rex in the night, like, picking a kidney from the body of the kid, and just eating it and saying, sweet, and it's just like Rawhead Rex under the moonlight, and the narrator actually calls the kid next to him the plate, and
and that's in the story too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and meanwhile, there's also the priest and Declan.
Yeah, so it's Declan Ewan in the story, and Reverend Coot.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to remember. It's Declan Ewan who first feels the power of the altar.
In the book, no, I think the first is
Coot.
Well, yeah, it could be.
I get them. It's easy to get them confused, but I think Declan Ewan is the one that goes nuts.
I think that Declan is the guy who already knows about it, about Rawhead and the whole legend behind it, and the tall man. And Coot finds it out accidentally one day when he is praying in front of the altar, and he touches the altar and he gets like an electrical discharge.
Yeah.
That actually gives him an erection.
Right, but and Ewan knew about Rawhead already, and he's sort of had these he's sort of been programmed by Rawhead in a way to become his follower.
Yeah, it's like he's what's the word that you guys call to the guy who helps the priest in the mass? I'm not an altar boy, but something else.
Verger.
Could be that.
That's what they call him in the movie, anyway.
Right. So, well, this guy, he's very, he helps the priest with mass and everything, but it turns out that he's quite a pagan kind of like follower of, he knows a lot about the legend of the old times. And he's just like biding his time until the old gods emerge again or something. Yeah. And when he finds out that Rawhead is loose, he actually meets Rawhead in the cemetery behind the church, and he gets baptized. Yeah. And Coot was hiding behind the graves in the cemetery and watching this, and. Yeah, and the act of baptism for Rawhead is actually he urinates on Declan. Yeah. And Declan actually, revels in this. And that's when Declan kind of like starts puking, but and then he's seen by Rawhead and Declan, and Rawhead tries to attack Coot. But in the meantime, Ron Milton is trying to talk to the police to find out who killed his kid and what's this monster and what they can do to stop him, right? Yeah. Yeah. And Coot was spotted by Rawhead, and he ran into the church and is trying to sort of barricade himself in. And trying to hide from Rawhead. Yeah. All right. So Rawhead arrives at the church. Coot goes out to investigate. Sees Rawhead. Coot flees inside the church into the basement, and then Coot finds the missing parish records. All right. And of course, in the movie, they went on and they made this whole thing with a stained glass window thing, which on the book.
Because it's a visual thing that they could do instead of being inside of people's minds. So let's just talk about this from the point where Rawhead baptizes O'Brien, O'Brien is the film. I'm kind of mixing things here. Yeah, Declan Ewan. Yeah. So, all right, it's actually a long story. That's what makes it hard to. It's like 50 pages, which is longer than most of the other stories that we've read so far. Yeah, so... Okay. Let's see. And there's a lot of characters. Yeah. So anyway, and we also Rawhead was studying... so, let's see, Ron Milton had met the inspector at the Tall Man. And, and he kept on giving him alcohol and, this was before his son died, right? Yes, Detective Sergeant Stanley Gissing. Yeah, Gissing, that's right. And so he was sort of giving him a bunch of alcohol, letting him get drunk, and then the inspector was getting a ride back to the police headquarters. And Rawhead was in the distance studying the car, thinking that it's some kind of a new animal that he'd never seen before.
and Gissing is actually attacked by Rawhead Rex.
Yeah.
And he gets his nuts removed by Rawhead Rex.
Yeah. And as Rawhead was studying the car, he decided to jump in front of it. He made the car sort of swerve off and hit a stone wall or something. And it was kind of cool that Rawhead was a little bit afraid of the way the creature's face got smashed into the wall. And he like this is some kind of an animal that they're all riding on.
Because he's never seen a car.
Yeah. And but he wanted to persevere because he needed to learn how to beat this animal.
The driver gets killed instantly, but then he fishes Gissing out of the car, and Gissing is described as kind of a pathetic, detective sergeant.
Yeah.
And actually, Rawhead finds him so pathetic that he doesn't even kill him. He just grabs his manhood and rips it off.
Yeah.
And goes away. So that takes care of Gissing.
Yeah.
And then there's the other policeman in the story, which is Sergeant Ivanhoe Baker.
Yeah.
It's Gissing's replacement. So Baker is the guy who, goes on to find Coot being murdered in the church, right, by Rawhead.
Yeah, and he's like, and it was kind of funny because just thinking of the way things are in the United States and the way things are in in England, it was like, he's like the detective in charge, and he doesn't even get a gun. All he has is authority.
Right. But when they find Rawhead at the church, they actually do fire on Rawhead.
Yeah, but he doesn't have a gun, and a lot of them don't have guns. The ones that don't have guns, they just are just praying that this is over soon.
Well, if Rawhead Rex was done in America, probably they would dispatch the National Guard to kill the monster.
Yeah, they would all have machine guns.
Yeah. So basically, the Reverend gets mangled by Rawhead but doesn't die, and Rawhead escapes the police again, and the father of the boy, Ron Milton, actually sneaks into the hospital, and he talks to the dying priest, and the priest tells him that there is something in the altar, get something, go to the altar and get it out of the altar.
Yeah.
And he goes there. At one point, he finds Declan destroying everything inside the church, the parish records, and all that stuff.
Yeah. And
he confronts Declan. He beats the crap out of him because Declan is saying that I'm not going to let you get what you want, and you're not gonna kill Rawhead. And Milton beats the heck out of Declan, goes to the altar, touches it, gets a discharge, electric discharge, opens it, and finds a stone. And it's like a little Venus, a little, fat woman with big breasts, and like the Willendorf Venus or something. And he picks it up, and in the meantime, Rawhead is destroying the city, the village, because he discovered from mangling one of the cars that the blood of the car, which is gasoline, can actually start on fire. And he goes like, hey, this is cool. I can set fire to things by crashing cars. So he's been doing that, but some of the cars have been blowing up in his face, and he's kind of like a little burn, and one of his eyes is like burned over.
Yeah, and he's got like pus around it and stuff.
Yeah.
And he can't see very well.
Right. The villagers are very afraid of Rawhead, and all of a sudden he sees Milton approach him with the rock in his hand, and he sees that it's the representation of that Venus thing.
Yeah.
And he gets really freaked out, and he starts to recoil, and meantime the villagers see him like being afraid or something, and they start ganging up on him. They start, poking him and fighting him and hitting him with stuff.
Yeah.
They wrestle him down to the ground, and then we finally see the epic climax of this is that Ron Milton climbs on top of Rawhead's head and like smashes it with the rock, and it ends there. He smashes Rawhead's brains out, and Rawhead just, as he dies, he just starts pissing himself, and that's the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a much more kind of a realistic, more satisfying ending, I think, than when we'll get to the movie. But
it's a difficult story to resume in a simple conversation like this because it's a big story. You might have said a few things and might have
and we did things in the wrong order.
Yeah, we did. That's the way things go. This is just an informal conversation. That's the way things go.
So let's go on to the movie, because I think we've sort of been, we've been trying to avoid talking about it because it's so easy. It's so easy to mix up the events of the movie and the events of the story. Because this was a Clive Barker screenplay, and he had worked with this group Green Man before on Transmutations, right?
Yes, this is a movie from 1986. It's a British and Irish horror film directed by George Pavlou.
Yeah. And he thought, okay, well, I'm going to give these guys a second chance. They really screwed me over with that other movie, but now I'm going to give them a second chance. And
it's going to be completely different.
Yeah.
They're going to see the error of their ways, and they're going to make a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
Famous last words.
So he wrote them the script. He designed the monster for them. They said, no, we're going to... I mean, this is all paraphrased, but they're like, no, we're going to design our own monster. And they locked him off the set, and they decided to film it in Ireland instead of England.
Yeah, because in the book, it used to be 40 miles southeast of London, but now it's instead of Ron Milton, it's Howard Hallenbeck that travels to Ireland to research items of religious significance for a book he's writing.
And he's an American, and presumably they did that so that they would have a more international audience, and it could be, they could get Americans to watch it. And Declan O'Brien instead of Declan Ewan.
Yeah. The opening scene is the same. I mean, the opening scene is the farmer is trying to poke the column, which is a very phallic object again, and they're trying to poke it out.
He's got a couple of friends trying to help him.
Yeah, and this time it's more dramatic, like lightning hits the column, and the monster rises from the dirt, and it's like,
But his friends, this was actually his friends get tired and they leave, and one of them says, I better be going. Me dinner's on the table. And when I was a huge Clive Barker fan in high school, and I made my friends watch this movie. And every time one of us would leave somebody's house, we always said, I better be going. Me dinner's on the table.
That's funny. Yeah. So the main character is looking for items, is researching pagan things and items of religious significance. So he enters the church, and he meets Declan.
Yeah.
And he talks to the Reverend Coot, which they kept the name, It's funny because I always think of an old Coot, and they call him the Reverend.
Yeah, and he goes, this Coot, he wouldn't happen to be old, would he? And it's like...
Yeah.
And Declan didn't think
American
that was funny
humor.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah. American humor being lost on the British.
Yeah.
And it's funny because there's a stained glass window in the church that's foreshadowing Rawhead Rex. And there's actually a piece missing from the stained glass window.
Oh, you're offline. Crap. Okay, we just lost Jose here.
Well, I better be getting back. Me dinner's on the table.
All right, so we had a little bit of a technical difficulty there, but we're back. We're on Rawhead Rex, the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just kind of we don't need to say the plot of the whole movie because it's mostly the same. But we can talk about the things that are different. Yeah.
Like, for example, the main character is different. He's an American. He's looking for that, religious stuff.
Yeah.
And then, off the bat, Declan is mostly depicted as this guy who's not very friendly. And there's an actual scene where there's like a storm going outside, and he's looking at the window, and he makes like kind of a weird gaze and laugh like he's a villain. Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
So off the bat, you know that this guy's cuckoo.
And when he grabs Coot to bring him over to Rawhead Rex, he's like, he was here before your Christ.
Yeah. There's a trailer park in this movie. Which,
yes.
Yeah, this trailer park that's gonna get, it's really more like a drive-in monster movie. It turns into that. Like, you got like a boyfriend, girlfriend, and they're like making out in the middle of the woods.
And the boy's trying to pressure her into having sex, and she doesn't want to, and she feels bad that because they were supposed to be babysitting little Neil, and she feels bad that they left him alone, and little Neil's got this robot, and the boyfriend's just a jerk and takes the robot away, and, you know.
Yeah. And then there's a funny scene where Rawhead kind of, they hear a noise, they start to make their way back to the trailer park, they find a dead guy hanging from a tree, they start running, and just as they're coming out of the tree line, they're running, holding hands, and Rawhead appears and roar, like gets the boyfriend, and she keeps running, and she goes up to the people that are gathering around the little Neil, and she turns to her boyfriend, and she's only holding his hand, you know, and his hand has been severed by Rawhead, and she just lets it go. Oh my god! It's kind of cartoonish.
It is, you know? because Rawhead is this lumbering costume that couldn't sneak up on anybody.
Oh god, you know, I mean, they made this monster to be. It looks like a punk rocker.
Yeah.
With hair. You know?
He wears boots and he's got all these shredded clothes. I mean, what is he doing wearing clothes?
I know, and his eyes, they're like red LED lights.
Yeah. And when he kills somebody, he pushes him up against the wall and sort of goes, blah, 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 and shakes his head, you know, like he's sort of like, you know, ripping into him like a dog.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's got these crazy teeth coming out of his face. And
they call him 9 foot tall in the movie, but he really only looks like he's maybe 6.5 or 7 feet tall.
Yeah, it's just a tall guy in a costume with a bad mask. And I remember this was coming out, and Clive Barker was saying something about the movie, like, "Oh yeah, they really developed this revolutionary technique on the neck muscle, so it looks really realistic." And it's like, what are you talking about? It's the stiffest monster I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
like when he turns his head, he doesn't turn his head; he turns his whole body.
Yeah.
It's
one thing you can say is that they at least tried to do the 2 rows of teeth. Because now that I have it on DVD, I always watched the VHS in the past, but I just got the Region 2 DVD because that was the cheaper one. And when Rawhead opens his mouth, you can see he's sort of got a little alien, you know, like Giger's alien tongue inside of there. Right. That's like a second set of teeth.
Yeah.
So at least, you know, on the small budget they had, they tried to figure out a way to do the 2 rows of teeth. But his teeth don't retract like cat's claws. They made his claws on his hands do that instead. Yeah,
that would be too fancy for the special effects.
And I liked Little Neil's shirt. Did you notice that it says Muscle Power on it?
The little kid with a mullet and a green shirt or something?
Yeah, and his shirt said Muscle Power.
Right. It's just so funny. I mean, this whole movie turns into a big... Even there's like a scene where there's like a girl and Rawhead sticks his hand into a trailer and pulls her blouse out, and you get like...
Really?
Like,
is that what we're up? Is that what we're doing now? Is that we're, you know, to Clive Barker's movie?
Yeah. So it turns into a really weird movie. Well, the scene that the guy is with his family and he stops and his daughter goes out of the car and Rawhead kills the guy's son. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah, that was almost beat for beat, except for, you know, obviously the murder wasn't as graphic. I mean, for one, because killing children in movies is always problematic, but also just because they just didn't have it together to do something like that.
Yeah. And then of course there's like the guy starts piecing together the mystery, and he starts seeing that he sees Rawhead in the top of a hill at night holding a guy's head, and he's like, "That's the monster that killed my boy."
Yeah, and at this point, my friends and I in high school used to make fun of his performance, because he was like, "Because of your goddamn stupidity, my son is dead."
Yeah. So he starts looking at the snapshots, and he finds out, you know, the mystery is that one of the panels in the stained glass window was put in the wrong place, and then, you know, and it's actually Rawhead Rex's face and stuff.
Yeah.
So
well, that's kind of an elementary. I mean, that's like a 5-year-old's puzzle trying to put those pieces together. I can't imagine, you know, how they couldn't have figured that out before.
Yeah, but basically it's pretty much the same thing as the story. The Reverend gets mangled, and you know, the church gets on fire, and he finds the rock, and he starts walking towards Rawhead with the rock while his LED eyes are like flickering.
But there was not as much time went by, so Coot never made it to the hospital. He was just sort of mauled by Rawhead, and he was left kind of laying against the church.
Yeah.
And Ron Milton, or Hollenbeck, in this movie, Howard Hollenbeck comes up to him and he's like, "The altar! You must look in the altar!" Then
exactly.
He dies.
And then he grabs the stone, and here's where it differs greatly from the story.
Yeah,
it's like,
this made me mad. This is what made me hate the movie.
Yeah, he goes up to Rawhead with his with the idol, with the little Venus thing, with the little woman, and it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Rawhead kind of pushes him away.
Yeah.
Declan starts saying, "Kill him, kill him," and Rawhead kills Declan. And
I guess that this statue is supposed to be some kind of a gun.
Yeah, goddess. Yeah.
Well, it's a goddess gun.
Yeah, and it turns out that because it's a goddess idol, it had to be a woman holding it. So our hero's wife picks up the rock.
And her performance here is really bad because it's like she doesn't. What is her motivation for doing this? She kind of walks up and she kind of wanted to help her husband, but why did she grab the statue? We don't really know.
Yeah, I maybe she was mimicking what her husband was doing, but all of a sudden there's this huge bunch of cheesy special effects.
Oh my God.
Light effects coming out that you just see that it's something that was like superimposed on the film.
Yeah, and she's standing there all majestic and there's a superimposition of a woman that's pregnant or I don't know. And then she's shooting lightning out of this and hitting Rawhead with it.
Yeah, and Rawhead, meanwhile, is just, flailing his arms in the air like, "Rawr, rawr, I'm a monster."
And somehow Hollenbeck knew that this little statue was supposed to be some kind of a gun or a weapon, that he could shoot Rawhead with, and he's like, "Oh, it's jammed. It's, it's like it's not working. I don't know what to do."
Yeah, and then ultimately, these lightning bolts coming out from the little stone thing are draining Rawhead. They make him look really shriveled and old.
Yeah.
And the guy comes up behind his wife, and just in typical hero fashion, he like hits him with an axe or something.
Yeah.
And the rock in the cemetery where Rawhead is lying on breaks. He falls into the hole. The rock falls on top of him. End of story.
Like, oh, that's neat. It's nice that open grave was there for him to fall into. And I think the worst part was, after she had grabbed the statue, and there's this goddess figure sort of appears, and the woman is all shooting lightning and stuff, and Howard Hollenbeck goes, "It had to be a woman." It's like, yeah, no kidding. Thanks. We really needed that.
And then it's just so cheesy that at the end they couldn't let it go. They had to make an epilogue where they show the cemetery in the daytime a few, days or something after. Yeah. And little Neil is there putting flowers on a grave.
Yeah.
And,
of his sister, I think, right?
No, for Andy Johnson. In loving memory of Andy Johnson.
Because even though he hated him.
Yeah. So, and then he leaves, and what do you get? You get a final scare behind him with, like, Rawhead's hand and face coming out of the ground. Rawr!
Yeah.
And, that's...
Because apparently Rawhead was going to be the new Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger in their mind.
God, we really dodged the bullet on that one.
Yeah. Well, and so after Transmutations in this movie, didn't Clive Barker sue the Green Man Company and get the rights back to Rawhead Rex so that they could never do this again?
Well,
he bought him out or something.
I don't know. Did he? I haven't looked into that. You might be more onto this than I am.
And I'd always, the idea of Clive doing a remake of Rawhead Rex, or I don't even know if you'd need to call it a remake. It's just, a better version of it.
Yeah,
would be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he really should have, sued Green Man Films because they made a horrible job of this.
Yeah.
They probably spoiled it for any possible remakes. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the problem is that Hollywood doesn't remake bad movies.
Right, exactly. They remake movies that they know that there's brand recognition and that people will go, to see because they enjoy the first version and there's a cult following. There's really not much of a cult following for Rawhead Rex.
No, I mean Clive Barker fans, that's it. But yeah, and everyone who saw this movie and it's not a Clive Barker fan has probably forgotten about it already.
Yeah. So, next story is The Confession of a Pornographer's Shroud.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good story. One of my favorites.
Another accountant.
Yeah, another accountant.
Yeah. And another accountant getting dragged into this into an intrigue that he doesn't really understand.
Yeah, we're just going to go a little bit over the general aspects of the story and how we feel about it and what kind of adaptations, if any, were made.
Yeah.
And basically it's just a story about this guy who, he became the accountant of a guy that he didn't know exactly what he did, but this guy had a smut empire.
Yeah.
And so he's a very, bland guy, and he doesn't enjoy.
And when Ronnie finds out about that these people he's been working for were pornographers, which for starters, I don't really exactly understand why being pornography peddlers was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
But Ronnie just goes nuts, and these guys are gangsters. I mean, there's no question that they're criminals. And Ronnie just goes nuts. He's pushing the magazines over. He's screaming at everybody, and
starts punching them out, and they punch him out.
Yeah, and then the next thing he knows, he's been framed.
Yeah. Apparently, they decided to frame this guy and send news to the tabloids that this guy, he's the one behind all this smut empire, and they're destroying his credibility and his career.
Yeah, and
so nobody else believes him. Everybody thinks that that's true, and it affects everything. And he goes on a vendetta, and he kills two of the guys.
Yeah, he goes out and buys a gun, which I think if this is in England, that's not easy to do.
Right.
We don't really know for sure if this is in England or not, though, do we? Some of them
I don't know.
Some of Clive's stories are sort of a generic sort of America, or a generic sort of England that's not really described. Like Hellraiser is that way.
Yeah, Hellraiser is kind of a mix of things. Yeah, it's true. But the actual pornographer guy was called Maguire.
Right.
And,
right.
And this guy's called Glass.
And
Ronnie Glass.
And Dork and Henry were the two thugs that were Maguires.
Yeah. So Glass shoots one of the guys, then he stabs the other one at the horse track, and Maguire finds out, he's not an idiot. He knows that, well, this guy that we framed is trying to kill my associates and me, so I'm going to kill him first.
And Ronnie is still living in his house, right? I mean, like his wife had packed up the kids and left, and Ronnie's going out and killing these guys and then going back home and sleeping in his normal bed at night.
I think so, yeah.
It's like, well, it wouldn't be too hard for them to track him down.
I think at this point he doesn't care anymore. He just wants to get revenge, so he's not even thinking.
I think for him being called a pornographer was worse than being killed, or worse than dying.
Because he's basically he's a meat and potatoes kind of guy. He doesn't really he's a very vanilla kind of guy, and he thinks that he is a pretty straightforward guy with some values, family values. And he really resents the fact that he was involved into this smut thing. And
his only flaw to him was that he was greedy and that he turned a blind eye. He never really took the time to figure out who these people were that he was working for because the money was so good.
Yeah. But basically, in broad strokes, he gets murdered by Maguire, and he awakens as a ghost.
Yeah.
And
not just any ghost, right? He's the shroud that was covering his body at the morgue.
Yeah, it's like he escapes his body, but the next thing that is in front of his body is the shroud. So he takes possession of this shroud, and this is kind of a take on the story on the little character, like little Halloween character of the ghost that a kid puts a sheet over his head.
Yeah.
And he turns into a ghost.
Yeah, and what's really cool, I mean, it sounds kind of stupid when you're explaining it, but when you read Clive's description about the way that his spirit inhabits this shroud and the way he learns to control it and stuff, you kind of really get lost in the story, and it doesn't seem dumb at all. I mean, it's kind of neat. Yeah.
Actually, I kind of visualized this character a little like the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Because at one point, he actually controls the shroud well enough for it to assume like kind of a human form.
Yeah.
A human shape.
And it's his shape enough that people can recognize him.
Yeah. So this is an amazing, take on the whole ghost thing.
Yeah.
The sheet. And, so he goes on as a ghost to take revenge on the rest of, the mobsters that framed him.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing thing. I mean,
it's really cool. And he finds that as he goes along, that his energy is draining. He gets ripped up by dogs at one point, and he just needs enough power just to kill this one, just to kill McGuire at the end. And and then he goes into, and then after it's all done, he goes to a church to confess.
Yes, the story actually begins with him after he finished killing all his enemies, and he's just hoping for the Father Rooney to come up to the confessionary, so he can just climb into the little cubicle and confess his sins. But he feels himself draining, and ultimately, at the end of the story, the priest actually finds the rag on the floor, and he goes like, "Hey, who left this here?" And he's like, "Well, it's going to be a cleaning rag," and he puts it up to his to his nose and sniffs it, and he's like, this smells funny, Yeah. And he goes into the vestibule or something, and he's got like a girl there that he's gonna actually have sex with. So,
well, I think he just had her undress in the other side of the confessional, and he was watching, and
yeah. But he's also a naughty priest at the end.
Yeah. So he used the rag to clean up the mess that he'd left him. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the way that the ghost kills McGuire at the end is really gruesome. He climbs inside. It's like he rolls himself into a little point, and he goes into McGuire's mouth, and he wrenches out and pulls everything out of this guy.
Yeah, so he grabs as much of his guts as he possibly can, and then pulls himself back out and turns McGuire inside out.
It's a horrible scene and very well written.
Oh, so. and McGuire's kids come up and look at it, or his daughter, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. So. Really kind of, when I was in high school reading these books, this kind of stuff is like, oh, that's awesome. But now reading it, I'm a little more, whoa, that's a little disturbing.
It's interesting because, like a teenager reading this gets a different impression than, a more mature person reading this.
Yeah.
You get more nuance, and at the same time, you kind of get more shocked about other things than you did as a teenager. Because as a teenager, it's all, hey, this is awesome. But like you said,
20 years ago, it was a different thing.
Then you realize why so many critics were like, oh, this is a fantastic book, very gruesome, this launches, Clive Barker into the horror fiction thing.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these scenes, it's like, oh, he's so good at describing this grisly, gory stuff, and now it's like, wow, that's really uncomfortable to read that. I don't know. I think that we have more empathy, as you kind of, you fall in love and you get a family and stuff, and you start thinking about your own mortality a lot more.
Yeah, and you get more nuance over, like, for example, this priest at the end. You get a different idea. You get more significance from what this priest is doing in the end of the story and everything. And it's like, well, it turns out that this guy was a straight-laced Catholic boy, and he kills people, and then he wants to confess himself to a priest that's not perfect as well.
Yeah, and another sad thing, I mean, besides the fact that he never was redeemed as, it was really important to him that, people see that he's not a pornographer, and that never happened. And he also wanted time to say goodbye to his kids, and that never happened either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this story, for example, it never had any kind of adaptation, not even in comic books or movies.
Right, this is it.
Yeah, I think this would actually be a good movie, too, because, right now we have the special effects to make this. I mean, like I said...
You mean a sheet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they can handle it.
Have you ever seen the movie The Hollow Man?
Yeah. Yeah, with Kevin Bacon, right?
Yeah, I kind of felt like this story could have been done like in that style and that kind of special effects. Like the sheet could turn into like the Hollow Man thing. Mm-hmm. And because that's what I was visualizing. I was visualizing actually like the 1930s Visible Man thing with the whole thing wrapped around his face.
Yeah.
But it would really be a funny thing if they managed to adapt this. And it was never adapted to comics or anything.
No.
So.
Oh, and one more thing before we forget. You know how the one thing we didn't mention was that the cops in this were corrupt. And sort of, in fact, they were even one of them. The police chief was even being hired by McGuire as a bodyguard, and so Stephen Cook from Facebook said he had said about that. Clive had said to me a few years ago at the Abarat 2 signing that he went as an observer on a few raids in Manchester with his cousin Craig, who was in the Vice Squad. He was appalled and disgusted at the heavy-handed way that innocent civilians were being assaulted by the police force, and he complained to Craig's colleagues about their unruly behavior. They ignored Clive, and he then chose to bring the valid point up in several of his books. The Cop from Dread is another prime example of this, and so is Hobart from Weaveworld. I'm guessing that perhaps he went as an observer during the Books of Blood writing phase, and this idea had been with him ever since. So that's a really interesting idea. I think probably a lot of the police that we see are either corrupt or ineffectual.
That's a cool insight and a cool little anecdote there.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah. And we hope to see him, join the guest list one day.
Yeah. And let's see. So, Scapegoats. This is a much shorter story, especially shorter than Rawhead Rex.
Yeah, not one of my favorites. Yeah. It's a little short, and it's a take on, again, the dead being, breaking into the world of the living, and, the sacrifices that the living have to do to keep the dead at bay.
And this is another one where, the me from high school had a much different view of this thing than I do now. Now we know that they were in is it the Hebrides? Is that how you pronounce these islands off of England?
Yeah, or Hebrides or something, I don't know.
Yeah, so we know that those islands are just off of the coast of England, but, when I was in high school, I thought that these guys were out on a boat in the middle of nowhere. Out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, and they found this. But yeah, so they wash up on this gravelly island, and it's and the dead are under the island.
Right.
And they're trying to figure out how to get their boat back in the water, and they anger the dead.
Yes, it's a small island that is described more like a little pile of stones, a little lifeless mound of stones.
Yeah.
It's not on the chart, and the guys are like, this is a party in the boat. And these guys are they have their own dynamics inside the group. Some of these guys don't really like each other very much.
Yeah.
Some of these guys are couples. Others are trying to get into others' pants. Yeah. And so basically the captain doesn't know what he's doing. Some people are making fun of it. Some people just want to get drunk.
Yeah.
And they come to this island, and they find a few goats on a little pen in the middle of nowhere. And they're trying to discover where they are and how they can get out of there.
And the guy who is steering the boat is all drunk and kills one of the goats.
He actually, they go out of the boat for a while. They go look around. When they come back, they see this guy completely butt naked with a rock in his hand, and he's just killing the goats just because he's stupid drunk.
Yeah.
And then there's a little fisherman that comes over in the boat and says, "What have you guys done?" And and he,
oh no, we had a system in place for generations, and I knew somebody was going to come along and mess it all up.
Yeah. Then all of a sudden, the stones start coming to life and start throwing themselves at them.
Yeah.
And like actually one of the guys hits from a stone from behind, and the stone actually like slices half his head right off.
Yeah.
And
and she can look down and see his face, splayed out on the rock.
Yeah. So basically, these rocks are killing the friends. They're being stoned to death, and the only people who survive is like a woman and the fisherman.
Frankie is her name.
Yeah,
you only hear her name once in the whole story, and she gets in the boat with the fisherman, and they're rowing away, and the dead start rocking the boat, and the fisherman's like, "All right, I give up," and he just drops the oars, and she's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, because at one point, like Kay, one of the guys that's stoned to death, he just arises from the water completely,
Or Ray, I think is his name.
Ray, right, Ray.
Yeah.
And the fisherman, just when he sees the dead rising to the surface, he says, he accepts his fate. And the dead swarm the boat, pull her and the fisherman down into the depths, and she actually gets pulled by her friend Ray, who's now a zombie. Yeah. And he's kisses her underground, under the water, and
and she always wanted Ray, and he seemed like just a real jerk to me. But then now they're together forever under the waves.
Yeah, it's a story that it has to deal with the dead that washed to that little island, because it seemed that whenever someone died nearby, the currents would drive them to this island.
Yeah.
So it was a place where a lot of dead accumulated,
and the dead have the rhythm of the sea in them.
Right.
And that's what makes them rise and go back down again. And to appease the dead, the people on a nearby island have been bringing the goats over every once in a while and saying, "Here, this is for you guys. Please don't hurt us."
Exactly. And living in a town that had a big fishing community in old times, I actually have a lot of stories about the dead and the sea and boats drowning just less than a mile from the shore. People seeing the dead, the fishermen dying and drowning, and their bodies coming to shore a couple of days later. And, stories of people who would see, dead people and ghosts. And actually, my great-grandfather had a story, which, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to say it really broad strokes. Is he was a guy that, he actually, a school of fishermen wanted to go out really early in the morning to catch the fish, but another school of fishermen pretended that there was a ghost near their boats, so they got this guy to dress up as a ghost. And being very superstitious, they would not go out to sea, and they told that to one of my great-grandfathers. And one day he went with them. He saw the guy dressed as a ghost with a sheet. He grabbed an oar and beat the ghost, and the ghost started screaming, and he was like, "Oh, this guy is a man." So he beat him some more, and that was the end of the story. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
That's an old family story.
That's funny.
Yeah. But... all right, that was
Well, so if you read Phil and Sarah's books on Clive and his history, we know that there was a place in these islands on Tyree, right, that was really special to him, and he would just sit and watch the sea, and the rhythm of the sea is kind of a recurring theme with him because of that.
Oh yeah, and also when he wrote Galilee, he was spending a lot of time vacationing with David in Hawaii,
right?
Or in those islands, which he also described on Galilee. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so yeah, I guess he really enjoys the sea and everything.
Yeah,
he being from Liverpool, I think he was also used to seeing. It's a port city, so a lot of ships coming in and everything. Yeah. So a lot of stories of, seafaring people.
And we have another insight here from Stephen Cook. He wrote to us, when I first read Scapegoats, it was a different style because it was written from the first person's perspective. That's true. It's first person past perspective, I think. And I thought it was great that the spirits who were writing on O'Neill's flesh chose to write differently. So he's talking about how in the very first story, the Book of Blood, all of these stories are the ones that were scraped into O'Neill's flesh. in the Book of Blood. Also, when I first read the story, I didn't realize that the narrator was actually a female, and for a male author to write from a female perspective was a great accomplishment. Also being originally from Scotland, I'm very familiar with a lot of the islands and the type of desolation in the landscapes he described. And I agree, I think, but Clive does write from the perspective of females a lot. So, back at the time that these books of blood were written, he didn't have very many stories out. But now, of course, we're in this kind of old hat for Clive.
Yeah, and for anybody who was paying attention, he also wrote a lot from the perspective of gay men as well. The next story, Human Remains, is one of those. Then you had, like, in the Hills and Cities. Yeah. So if you're paying attention, it shouldn't have been a really big, surprise when he actually came out to the Advocate magazine. So
right around the time that Sacrament was just going to come out.
There was always this female approach and this queer approach in terms of narration of the stories, which actually probably is what makes it work. It was just something different. It was not as, cut and dry as we were used to reading things like, So the next story is,
Human
Remains. Yeah.
I would say that this is probably the story that's been put in compilations the most. Because this is Clive Barker's vampire story.
Is it? I always thought of this more like a new take on the Golem thing.
Well, it's that too. It's if you need to, if you want to pigeonhole it, I guess it's been put in vampire compilation stories because this creature
it does feed on blood.
It feeds on blood, like in the same way that Frank from Hellraiser fed on blood to make himself whole.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, and it gets to a point where he doesn't need it anymore, like Frank.
Yeah. So, can I start off with the story? Okay, so the main character in this story is a male prostitute called Gavin. Mm-hmm. And, Gavin, he lives pretty much on the street turning tricks, and one day he meets this guy who's an antiquarian, this guy called Ken Reynolds.
Yep.
Ken Reynolds is obsessed about Roman Britain, and he actually has a lot of stuff in his house, and the thing is, Ken Reynolds had hired him not for sex, but because he had something in his bathtub, and, that thing wanted blood.
Yeah.
But he kind of feels guilty about it, and maybe, he feels bad about turning into a murderer, so he just lets Gavin go.
But not before Gavin had looked into the tub and seen the thing.
Yeah, he's like, it's kind of like a wooden thing, like a statuette or something.
Curled up in a fetal position in the bathtub.
Yeah, in a bathtub full of dirty water or something. Mm-hmm. And so he leaves, and so this guy actually here.
So he starts to find that that things are happening that he doesn't know about that are supposed to be involving him.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets in that confrontation with Pretorius, who is a kind of a pimp.
Yeah.
And Pretorius is like, "Why did you mess up one of my best boys?" And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything." And this statue that he recognizes from the tub comes and rescues him. He kills him.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
right. It kills everybody, and there's a scene where he describes like the blood dripping all over, the other, self.
Yeah. And it's like looking at it, knowing that it's not a real thing, but he could see how it sort of looked a little like him, and he could see how people would mistake it for him.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's like Pretorius says that Gavin messed up one of his kids.
Yeah, hung him from the ceiling and sliced him all up. And bathed in his blood, and he was still alive.
Right, and at that time he still sees the creature as kind of a statuette, but it's already taking his shape. Mm-hmm. And in the confrontation, Gavin gets his face cut and
his chin,
and then the monster looks at him and says, "We're going to have a scar," and then he runs his finger over his own face and a scar erupts there as well. And then so basically he discovers that this creature is trying not only to drain blood from people, but he actually is also kind of an identity thief because he's turning himself into Gavin because he was so taken by his beauty, because Gavin is described as a really handsome man, a handsome most beautiful boy, and he wants to draw upon that perfection himself, and he wants to be beautiful, and he wants to live his own life. So, and then Gavin goes back to Reynolds' place, I think. That's when he confirms that the bathtub is empty, right?
Yeah.
And he starts to realize.
And Reynolds, it takes a little bit to convince Reynolds that this is actually Gavin, that it's not the creature. Right, coming to kill him and erase the evidence, or kill the witnesses.
Actually, Reynolds pulls a knife and says, "You monster, you get away from me!" And is "Look, don't you know who I am? I'm Gavin." And it's "Oh,
no, you killed Gavin. I know you're the monster."
Right, but it turns out that he didn't actually kill him.
Yeah.
But so then they talk about the statue in the bath, and Reynolds tells him that it imitates, that he found it near Carlisle. He was in charge of an excavation. Yeah. He found it lying in the bathhouse. A statue curled up beside the remains of an adult male.
Yeah.
And, so he was like, "And you fed this statue?" And it's like, "Don't ask." And it's like, "I'm asking." And it's like, "Yes." Yeah. So then he discovers that he sent him away that day because he didn't want to feed him to the creature. Yeah. But then he goes berserk. He goes what happens when this monster actually starts to look exactly like me? What's going to happen?
And he's like, it takes your soul.
It when it's perfected its physical form, it's going to steal the one thing it can't imitate, your soul. Yeah. And it's like, and then he starts to look for him. And I think Reynolds actually commits suicide like the Romans did, right?
Yeah, he throws himself on his sword, and he's lying there, and it missed his chest, and I think it had gone into his stomach.
Yeah.
And he's lying there. It took him 10 minutes to die.
Right. And then Gavin, one day he's sleeping, and the monster shows up in his apartment, and he's asking for help. And he's got a hole in the middle of his chest, and he's like, and Pretorius had friends.
Yeah, and Gavin's been just sleeping constantly, sleeping, and letting this creature live his life for him, which was really interesting. And it makes you think: is this some sort of a spell or was there some sort of a transfer already happening that Gavin was losing himself,
the loss of his identity is going along with the loss of his life force,
or was it just some kind of identity thing, or some kind of psychological thing?
Yeah, Gary Hoppenstein actually writes about this story in analysis. He says, "Of course, Barker implies that Gavin didn't have much of a soul to begin with. The author describes Gavin as pursuing a zombie's existence. Yeah. Gavin makes his living as a male prostitute, yet his indifference to sex or any sort of real human contact is pathological. His is a self-centered world, a world of narcissistic love, where his most important daily ritual is when he grooms and preens himself for his next hustle."
Yeah.
So, and then like the statue, or, I don't know how to call this creature. Yeah. The creature shows up, he has a hole in his chest, and he says, Pretorius had friends. And like Gavin says, why aren't you dead? And he's like, "I'm not yet alive."
Yeah. And
asks him what he is, and he doesn't know.
It's like, I don't know, there's only one of me, so how I don't have anyone to ask. Right.
He says, and he's a creature without an identity. He says to Gavin, "You know what you are because you see others like you. If you were alone on Earth, what would you know? What the mirror told you." Yeah. So, and because he's taking his place, he actually starts to, think that, okay, I'm Gavin. So at one point, just keeps sleeping, and ultimately the creature takes his clothes, just leaves, and Gavin just goes into a stupor, and, one day he walks over to the cemetery to see his father's grave, and the other Gavin shows up, and he stands in front of the cemetery, in front of his father's grave, and starts crying.
Yeah.
And he asks him, "What's wrong?" And the creature says, "It always makes me cry coming here." And he's like, "Oh, you've been here before?" And he's like, "Oh, yes, many times over the years."
Yeah, and he's like, "Wait a minute, you haven't been alive that long."
Yeah, this isn't your father, it's mine. And it's like, "Well, I don't see any tears on your face." And he's like, "Well," and he goes like, well, I feel." And the guy says, "Oh, you feel nothing at all. Where I will miss him until I die." And so, and he just walks over to him, and he says, "You can have it, snot and crying and tears and everything. You're welcome." And he just walks away like an empty shell of a man. And it turns out that being human is not all it's cracked up to be, and the creature is actually feeling pain, and it says, "Why is it loss that makes us human?" And he's actually suffering for his dad, which is not dad, it's Gavin's dad.
Yeah.
But, and then it's funny because this story started off with Gavin, complaining about toothache. Yeah. And just as walking away, the creature asks him, "Can you recommend a dentist?"
Yeah, yeah.
So, I guess I get this idea that Gavin kind of walks away, and I don't know, maybe he would almost disappear, almost commit suicide or something. But although it's not
he wandered into traffic.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah, so he's walking barefoot because it was raining and he didn't put his shoes on. He didn't care what other people thought, and now he's walking out into traffic, and it's kind of left to chance. Is he going to live? Is he going to die? We don't know.
It was the commuter hour, and the wing of the car grazed his leg as it passed. Another almost collided with him, And then he says, "From now on, he belonged to chance, whose standard bearer he would surely be." Yeah. So it's like he doesn't care if he walks into traffic and dies. Then that's going to be it, and the other creature is going to get his soul, or already has. So
and the Tapping the Vein comic of this is pretty good.
Yeah, art from P. Craig Russell. Yeah, it's a really nice graphic novel, and it's actually in.
Oh, I was going to say the impression that that you leave with is that it's got a lot of blue and gray and white color to it.
Yeah, Human Remains is a story in Tapping the Vein Volume 1, and Scapegoats is a story painted by Bo Hampton in Tapping the Vein Volume 2. So if you guys have that, you can always go back and read it.
Yeah, and Rawhead Rex is a
Eclipse.
An Eclipse graphic novel.
Yeah, adapted by Les Edwards. A really good job there.
Yeah. So
adapted by Steve Niles. Sorry.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, and Son of Celluloid is also painted by Les Edwards.
And Steve Niles is a really cool guy. If you follow him on Twitter, he writes a lot on Twitter. But he often credits Clive Barker for helping him start his career by doing these Tapping the Vein, and
you met him a few times, right?
I met him once, at that Burbank Dark Delicacies signing for Midnight Trade. Yeah. That's
when they said, "Well, we can get him to come over here, and you can get him to sign that."
Yeah, because I had my my Night of the Living Dead London, and I'm like, and Del Housen, who runs that place, was like, you want Steve Niles to sign this? I was like, oh, you don't have to go, yeah, that'd be nice. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll just call him up and he'll come right over, and he did.
Oh, cool. So wait, I'm getting the idea that he lives close to that place?
Yeah, he does.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, okay, that was pretty much all the stories. I mean, we did skim over. We always talk more about the first few stories, and then the other stories usually suffer because of it. But it's just the way things are.
Yeah, I mean, if they were any that we were really super excited about, or if they have a movie and they just have to be at the end, then that'll be different. So I think I'm gonna forego the contests for a little while until we get more participation.
Okay.
And let's see, comments and questions. We have one comment from the website. This is kind of interesting. I'm going to kind of paraphrase this because his English wasn't great, but he's like, "Hello guys, good job. I posted he said I make news, but he put a link to our blog on his Russian fan site, and it's www.clivebarker.ru. So
cool.
if you can speak Russian and you're a Clive Barker fan, definitely go there.
I am checking it out right now. Luckily, Chrome, the browser, actually has like a translation feature.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and his name was VXGA. I don't know what that is, but
I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
And did you find the news about the podcast too?
I'm looking at it. I say news: Daniel von Bargen tried to commit suicide, and then each man has a tale to tell.
Oh, okay.
And this is something else. It's talking about Clive Barker. Then there's a Valentine poem from Clive Barker, which is that 6 commonplaces.
Okay.
Clive is on the mend. Clive Barker spent a week in coma. Podcast of Clive Barker. Here it is.
There we go. And it's got my picture with the standing next to the Abarat painting.
Yeah. It's pretty nice. Posted on 8th of February.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And Mark Miller took that picture.
So, what's the name of our listener?
It was his username on the blog. Let's see, was VXGA.
All right. Well, thanks for the mention. Shout out.
Yeah.
VXGA.
Yeah. Thanks. We appreciate that. Hopefully, we'll get more listeners. I imagine there's probably more people in Russia that speak English than English-speaking people who, also speak Russian.
Russian. Yeah.
So that's we've kind of hit the end here. Our next one is going to be about Books of Blood, Volume 4, in 2 weeks. One of these days we may do two in a row to kind of fill the gap, but I don't know. Every once in a while things come up, so we may not get a whole 26 in the whole year. Hey,
we're having fun doing it. That's what matters.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh. Yeah,
and of course, look forward to in about a month the episode where I interview Craig Sheffer and Ann Bobby, and and I'll also there's a question and answer session. It's either before or after the 3-hour Nightbreed, and I'll be recording that and putting that on there too.
And I think I'm going to speak for everybody else who can't attend the Nightbreed screening. I'm going to ask you, please, give us a detailed account of your viewing experience of the composite Nightbreed cut that they're doing. They actually got the original DP to work with them on director of photography, right? Robin Vidgen?
Yeah, and Roger made a good point when he said it. You can't. I don't know if you can call it a director's cut when it was probably Mark Miller and this. Director of photography putting it together, but you got to know that probably Clive Barker has at least seen it. I
guess
he's. It's not like we know that this isn't the version of the movie that would be. If somebody made a full director's cut, I'm sure there's extra stuff in here that doesn't need to be on it, but it's really cool for the fans.
Right. Yeah. So Mark Miller is also helping to put. He helped to put this cut together.
Yeah, he's going to be the one introducing the movie at in Charlotte.
Okay. All right.
At the Mad Monster Party.
All right. I hope you have fun there.
Oh yeah, it should be great. I just hope I don't spend an enormous amount of money.
And I just checked, and yes, Tony Todd plays the Beast in Valerie on the Stairs.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Unfortunately, I can't have him sign my iTunes account. That's where I bought that movie. I owned the DVD when it came out, and I hated it, so I got rid of it. But then
really?
Yeah, but then for this podcast, I figured, I should probably own everything. So I bought it.
Did you not like
on iTunes.
The story, or was there anything about the DVD that you didn't like?
I'm trying to, because I can hardly even remember what it was about. It's like that house with a bunch of authors living in it, right?
Yeah.
But I read Clive Barker's treatment, that they put up on the Revelations website first.
Yes, in parts, yeah.
And then seeing the movie version, it was so much different that I didn't like it.
Yeah. I need to get back to that treatment. I think I had it once, but then I had to format my hard drive.
Oh,
I lost a few things. So, do you have that?
Yeah. I'll email it to you.
All right, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, it was another fun episode of the Clive Barker podcast.
All right. Yep, and everybody have a good night.
All right, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep. Thanks for listening to the Clive Barker podcast. You can find us on the web at www.clivebarkercast.com. Twitter is @BarkerCast. Email is ryandanhauser@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, or the forum is www.timewins.com/Clive. This podcast today is sponsored by Ryan Danhauser at Remax Associates of Fairbanks. If you know someone who's looking to buy or sell a house in Fairbanks, or Alaska, or around there, go to www.ryandanhauser.com.
Hey, this is Ryan again. In the original airing of this episode, we had the song Rawhead by Propane, Pro-Pain, in this episode right here. In order to respect the rights holders, we've removed it from the episode, and I recommend you find Rawhead by Pro-Pain and give it a listen. It's kind of an old CD that might be out of print, but ironically you can probably find it on YouTube, which, because of YouTube, we're re-editing these episodes. But anyway, Rawhead by Propane. Thanks for understanding, and this podcast, having no beginning, will have no end.